1. To start off, I'm an open-minded skeptic, somebody who always tries to find the scientific answer instead of branding every noise as a ghost. That said, I never dismiss the possibility if none of the logical answers fit the situation. I'm currently seeing a girl, and we got onto the topic of the paranormal and supernatural. She was telling me about her experiences going to see a medium, and she was describing certain family members that apparently came through. Let me paint a bit more of a scene for you. We were sat in her living room, and I was on one side of the sofa, she was on the other. The position I was in, she had 2 French doors leading to her back garden. She didn't close her curtains even though it was dark. Weird, right? Outside in her back garden was very dark, no immediate street lighting, no security lights, no garden lights, etc. Opposite the doors was the wall her TV was mounted on, which also had the doorway to the kitchen. The kitchen light was on, as was the living room light. In the position I was in, I was looking at her, but I could see the French doors out of the corner of my eye due to how dark it was outside. I could see the reflection of the room extremely clearly. We were chatting away about her experiences with the supernatural and whatnot, which may have added to something with the power of suggestion, perhaps. We weren't talking about any one specific thing, just supernatural things in general. She mentioned members of her family, how they'd act, the kind of people they are, etc., but I kept hearing things in the kitchen which she wasn't hearing. I would say I do have somewhat sensitive hearing, but nothing outstanding. The sounds were more of cutlery and plates being moved in the sink. You know the sound like if a spoon is inside of a bowl and somebody is moving the spoon? Her sink isn't actually that big, and I thought perhaps some of the things in the sink were maybe put at an angle, and they just moved on their own. Then I also thought she has a dishwasher and a washing machine very close to the sink. Whilst they shouldn't cause vibrations within the sink, there was a possibility that they caused just enough vibration to cause them to move. I was also hearing somebody moving around. Another thing to point out was that she has a son who was asleep upstairs. I assume he was asleep anyway, as he does have a habit of getting out of bed. However, I heard nothing from upstairs other than the typical house-settling noises. The odd floorboard here and there. The flooring in the kitchen was lino on top of concrete, so there were no floorboards or anything to squeak, but you heard shuffling and heavy footsteps moving around. The footsteps certainly sounded like somebody was trying to be quiet. This furthered my belief it was her son that had come downstairs to see who she was talking to. He's a very curious child. I was waiting to hear a voice suddenly say "Mummy," as he does, but he never did. The biggest thing was seeing the reflections. As I said in the beginning, I had a perfect view of the reflection. I could see the doorway and part of the kitchen very easily if I looked. As I was hearing the noises, I tried to stay calm and not get distracted. After all, the last thing I wanted to do was worry her, saying I can hear somebody in her house. But I started to see somebody in her kitchen. At this point, she hasn't told me much about her family members that had passed. The conversations were mostly about her living family. However, I remember clearly that out of the corner of my eye I could see a man poke his head around the corner of the doorframe, look into the room, and then pull his head out. It was a quick motion. It was as if somebody was on the other side of the wall in the kitchen, right up against the wall, and was poking their head around to see who was in the room. This happened around 4 or 5 times that I saw, and safe to say my heart was beating quickly. I could just make out a few physical features. I believe he had either short hair or was quite bald, and he looked to be a somewhat tall gentleman. I'm 5'8", and I'd say he was at least 6 feet-ish. Whilst I was startled at this, after a few moments, I got a more playful kind of feeling. I should probably say I believe I am somewhat empathic. I pick up feelings very well, and just get accurate feelings in situations. And the feeling that I got was of somebody who was just being nosy, like if a family member makes an excuse to do something, but the real reason is they just wanted to know what's going on and have something to gossip about. I didn't say anything about it, but it certainly freaked me out a bit. Fast forward a few weeks and I'm back at her house. We're in the same positions we were in last time, and we got onto the topic of the paranormal again. She then started talking about her medium experience, but this time she started to chat about her grandfather that died, and some other family members. The medium said she had family around her all the time, and other than her grandfather, the only person she can think of was her sister, who died when she was a newborn, and she would be 35, I think, now. I then proceeded to tell her what I saw, and I even reenacted what I saw. I got her to sit in the seat I was, told her where to look, and I did what I remember the figure doing. Safe to say she was freaked out. I told her what I felt I saw and described the figure, and she just stared at me and said, "I think you saw my granddad." She told me the majority of her family were the kind where if she had a boy over, they'd end up with their ears at the door listening to what they were saying, purely to be nosy. 2. So to preface this, I've been living in my house for a month now, and when I first moved in, I was very excited. When I got there, I went and looked around, and I noticed a few strange things like different flooring all around the house, and a basement with 2 doors that is basically just a big dirt-floored room with nothing down there. The first night I was there, when I was trying to fall asleep, I was concerned because I kept hearing knocking on my walls. All the knocks were pretty fast-paced, but there were groups of them, which I thought was strange, mainly because there was no pattern. I kinda wrote it off as being an old house and let it go. Later that week, however, I was laying in my bed when my closet door, which was latched, opened on its own. That one freaked me out, and I basically just sat there dumbfounded for about a minute before a chill ran down my spine like I've never felt before. So at this point I'm pretty curious, but for the next 2 weeks nothing really crazy happened besides the knocking. Some things being not how I left them, like cabinets being open and blinds opening and closing, and the occasional really loud bang. It happens really late at night, and has woken me up a multitude of times. But then about a week ago, I had made burgers that I was going to cook, so I put 2 plates, the paper kind with dimples all around, with the burgers on a piece of tin foil on my table. I didn't press the tin foil down at all. I ran into my room to grab something, and I heard a big smack on the ground. I ran in the kitchen to see what happened, and I see one of the plates about 5 feet away from the table, still upright, with all the tinfoil pressed into and around the plate. And the one side of the table had the same thing happen. That one is kind of what set it off for me, that there is something paranormal in my house. I'm also concerned because I've woken up with bruises and scratches that don't make sense. So the point of this is I've just been ignoring it up until this point. Is there something I should do to protect myself, or would that just cause more issues? Any advice is appreciated. 3. Hi, I'm a male in my 20s from Ireland, and the incidents I'm going to relay to you occurred about 3 years ago. I stress that everything I tell you here is 100% genuine. I've had a few small things happen to me over the years, but I've always wondered about a cluster of incidents which occurred over a very short period whilst I lived in Diggs' house in college. Hopefully someone may be able to shed some insight into what I experienced. It was my first year. I had started college and settled into Diggs' accommodation in Dublin, Ireland. Diggs, for anyone who doesn't know, is somewhere students live when in college, and usually involves renting a room with a family in their home at a fraction of the cost of college or university accommodation. I was living with an older lady and her 2 adult sons, but who were older than me, and quite pleasant. The lady herself was nice, if a little old-fashioned, and over the first semester all was well. It wasn't until the end of my second semester in April that I was left bemused. The first occurrence was something I could only explain as bizarre. It happened when I went to go to the toilet in the middle of the night. I slept upstairs along with the rest of the family. My room was closest to the stairs and the landing shaped in a U. The bathroom was across the hall at the other end of the U, a good 10 to 15 strides away. I used the toilet and all was well. I tried to be as quiet as possible, returning to my room not to waken anyone. However, I no sooner had the door shut and turned to make the journey back to my room when what I can only describe as a black fog descended on me. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the dark, and maybe the sudden movements from getting out of bed had caused me to hallucinate, but no. this was more than a trick of the mind. It was almost as if I was able to physically swipe it away with my hands and see it move coherently as I did. I was panicked, but didn't feel the need to scream. I tried to fight my way through it, but it barely felt as if I could move. After what felt like 30 to 60 seconds, it cleared, but as it did so, it left me dangerously lingering on the top of the stairs. I could have sworn I took no more than 2 or 3 steps in my panicked daze, but I shook myself down and rushed back into my room, locking the door and leaving the lights on for the rest of the night. The following morning at breakfast, I mentioned nothing, and all was normal. Over the next few days, everything was fine until about a week later. This time it was a dream that scared the living shite out of me. I was asleep in my room when I found myself dreaming of a particular place, my grandmother's home. The house was a typical 2-story Irish farmhouse. It had been renovated about 12 years before my dream, but I was witnessing it, as it was when I was a young boy. I can remember taking the details of the old stonework in when the front door opened. It was my grandmother, delighted to see me. "Come in," she exclaimed, greeting me with a hug as she guided me into her home, as it was when I was a child pre-renovation. It is at this point I feel I should disclaim my grandmother had been dead 11 years at this point. She took me to a seat at her kitchen table, made me some tea and a sandwich, and started talking to me. I can't distinctively say what she told me, but I remember it being extremely positive, along the lines of, "I'm proud of you and what you've achieved." At this point, I would have been happy for the dream to finish, however, it took a dark twist. I can remember witnessing my grandmother's face beginning to twist and contort into something unrecognizable. I got up to run away, and as I did so, I noticed her feet were not human, but hooves what I imagined were a goat's. As this being, who was once my grandmother, took notice of my horror at their hooves, they echoed a piercing, bellowing, screeching laughter, and it was at this point I awoke. This wasn't like waking from any nightmare or even sleep paralysis. Oh no. I awoke to find myself upright in my bed, sobbing uncontrollably, with my digs lady banging on my door to see if I was okay. After a minute or so of composing myself, I threw on my dressing gown and opened the door to chat to her. I could see she was visibly concerned, and it was obvious to her I had been crying. She asked what happened, and I explained I had just had a bad dream. I could see she was apprehensive to even question me further, but I sensed she really wanted to see if I was okay. She looked at me alarmingly and said she had heard me crying for a few minutes. I looked back at her horrified, but managed to pass it off with a joke, telling her, "If you didn't laugh at the nightmare I'd had, you might as well cry." She smiled and told me if I needed anything to just give her a call. I entered my room again, now puzzled at how I could have been crying in my sleep, but I chalked it off as a freak episode and got myself ready for college. A day later, I returned back to my family home for the weekend and told my mother of the dream about my grandmother. I left out the eerie ending, and she simply told me to say a few Hail Marys for my grandmother. That was a Saturday, and that night, the final incident of this saga occurred. Again, it happened whilst I was asleep, but this time in my own bed in my own house. I awoke too early in the morning for my liking on a Sunday. I looked at my watch at my bedside locker to see it was 5-ish. I was still half asleep, but I could feel a burning sensation coming from my legs. I gave my leg an instinctive itch and was ready to roll over and go back to sleep. However, when I touched my leg, I could immediately feel what could only be described as a 7 to 8 inch long scratch mark on my inner thigh. It was the kind of scratch you'd associate with an animal, but my dog didn't sleep inside of our house. It was quite obviously fresh, and my own nails were much too blunt from biting them to even cause marks of striking. I kind of ignored this incident, and a week later I moved out of my digs house, and I have not had any kind of experiences even remotely as wild as those since. At the time, I was at a loss for an explanation, and to this day I still am. I never brought up anything that happened with my digs family nor my own family, apart from telling my mom a vague version of my dream. I would be interested in hearing people's opinions on my stories, and I also would like to stress I wasn't under any form of influence from drugs or alcohol at the time, nor was I reading or practicing any sort of occult material, and I actually attended Roman Catholic Mass weekly with my own family. Have any of you experienced anything similar? If you've made it this far, I genuinely would like to thank you for your attention. 4. This is such a cliché way to start explaining my experience, but despite believing in the paranormal, I am an extremely skeptical person, so I always look for rational explanations, and for this, there aren't any. So, I was 16 at the time. I'm female. Worked at a Chinese restaurant. Loved working there and stayed for 2 or 3 years, but the owners did have their flaws. Taking most of the tips from the staff and only giving 15% to share between all waiting on staff, etc. The owners loved money, let's put it that way. To explain the layout of the restaurant, it is relevant to the story. There were 4 floors, and the second and third floor had rooms that 2 members of staff lived in. The rest of the rooms on those 2 floors were stock rooms. The ground floor and the first floor were the restaurant. Attached to this building was another, and the ground floor of that building was the bar, and another part of our dining area of the restaurant. It was connected to the 4th-story building by the kitchen, which only staff could walk through. So the minute I started working there, I was noticing weird things happening, like bamboo baskets flying off shelves on CCTV, things going missing, things moving in front of us, etc. One day, a chef, who was also my uncle, told us that the owner, the wife, was married 4 times before, and all her husbands died, and she inherited all their money. The deaths were sudden and unexplainable. She met the owner, her current husband, at her ex-husband's grave as his father was buried in the same cemetery. They quickly became business partners and went on a business trip together in Scotland. The restaurant is situated in another country. Whilst the owner's previous wife ran things. My uncle has worked there for 30 years, and the room now occupied by a current member of staff used to be a place to stay for the previous owner's wife. And one night she said goodnight to my uncle and went to bed and said, "I'll see you tomorrow to help prep in the morning." My uncle goes home, comes back in the next morning and begins prepping. He waits a little while for Sally to come downstairs, and she doesn't. He goes upstairs and she's not there. All her stuff is completely gone. He goes into the back and hears the door open, and the owner's current wife, Chloe, is cleaning everything with bleach. She's supposed to still be in Scotland with the owner. My uncle asks what she's doing, and she said she came back to help after an argument, and that she needed help cleaning blood off the ceiling from thawing the ribs and hanging the ducks. My uncle blindly helps her. Sally has never been seen since by anyone at the restaurant or the family of the owner. Fast forward about 20 years, I go upstairs to the first floor of the restaurant to turn off a till that I could see was still on through the CCTV. Even though I turned everything off, including all the other lights that were still off, and as I get halfway up the stairs, I see a pale figure of a woman wearing nothing but 3/4-length leggings and dark, messy hair. I didn't see a face. I ran back downstairs screaming. I asked for a description of Sally, and what was she last wearing, and it matched what I saw. They all told me it was my brain playing tricks, as I was working 70 to 90 hours a week, and was overworked and tired. This was the first time I'd seen a ghost as a full apparition of a human. A month later, a member of the staff on the bar, who was unaware of what I had seen seen exactly the same thing on the same floor in the toilets. This wasn't an hallucination. There was also a Chinese calendar on the second floor from 2003 that hadn't been touched. The stock rooms were a mess and hoarded stuff in there from 1999 to 2020, and one day I was steaming the napkins and I heard paper fluttering. This was September 15th, 2020, or around that date, and some paper from the calendar fell, and revealed that date for 2003. I always saw the calendar's paper move, but this was very different. I have many more stories from working here. 5. I had a dogman or wolfman sighting on the Oregon coast. I've heard of this sort of thing, but only briefly. I've never really thought that much of it, nor have I ever done any reasonable research into it. This is a really odd story of how I came to see a literal dogman last night at around midnight. I live in a neighborhood, by the way, but we are on the edge of a large forest behind our house, so not completely rural. Funny part of the story. I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release. I can't stand to harm mice. It triggered at midnight, and the loud pop of the door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires, and didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard, by my house, I always go about 3 miles away into a forested area. I'm not cruel enough just to release him by someone else's house, thus causing them a mouse problem. Relevant info, I know. Anyway, before I even got into my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible, foreboding feeling that was almost telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain. I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare. I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange. I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with a little cage. Going down the street, it was literally only 1 block away from my home, that I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought, well, that's got to be the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night. As I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour, it suddenly came out of the streetlight and walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running, but it wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog. But I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, and so I can confirm it was not a wolf. What I saw looked like a humanoid, literally hunched over on all fours, back erect in a hunch, moving with a pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. Literally looked like a giant wolf head. The being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky. My brain literally froze. Instantly, I began rationalizing, but it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I had just seen. The closest thing I can compare this to would be the werewolf from Harry Potter that Professor Lupin turns into. All I can think of is, how did they know? That's nearly identical to what this thing looks like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to looking like that exact CGI rendering. On all fours, its backside probably about 4 to 4.5 feet in height, the head higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there was no way this thing was a bear or other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was another familiar thing about it. To anyone who might say maybe it was just a really large dog that was sick and hunched, definitely no. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen. It'd be over 4 feet in height at the back, not the head, while hunched over. Definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear, as none of this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it could not be defined. You could tell if it wanted to, it could easily have stood up on 2 legs. What's more insane is that I could feel its energy. The energy was dark, oppressive, and really just a sense of danger swept over me. It had a very otherworldly energy about it. To continue, I slowly continued driving. and quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it had gone. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush, looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse. But I can tell you this, when I got home I ran into my garage and shut the garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked, truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw, they always say. I always know my mind didn't just fill in the blanks or hallucinate this. Last night I looked up stories of dogmen only to find people's descriptions and drawings were fairly identical to what I had witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I am convinced it is real. I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this. Does anyone know how common Oregon sightings are? And has anyone ever heard of an Oregon coast sighting? I'm also curious if anyone else has heard of literally getting sick to your stomach and not feeling well just before the encounter. Thanks. I do have house security cameras, but they're all out of batteries. I'm going to get them set back up today and make sure to record at nighttime from here forward. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Paranormal Stories, episode 287. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you could please hit the like button before you go, I'd greatly appreciate it. Alright, where are we? We're on Friday, aren't we? Yes, we are. Good news, everyone. I'm announcing this now, so I'm forced to keep doing it. I've already began recording for October's video. I want to do at least 30 stories in a Halloween video, so I'm just going to be recording a little bit extra each week, so I'm not rushing to get it all done at once. So I'm not stressing myself out. So doing 1 or 2 extra stories in a recording session isn't really a hassle, so we'll do it that way, and they'll all be ready. Well, I'm recording now in August, so August, yeah, they'll be more than ready by October. We'll say at least 30. We'll see how many I get, because getting paranormal stories is a little bit easier than some of the others, thankfully. Alright, no major plans for tonight, no shout-outs today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is: does anyone really want to order a Chinese takeaway whenever anyone mentions Chinese food? Alright, no, that's not the question. I've just been thinking about it since I did that last story. Yeah, I know, ghost, ex-wife, all that, but, Chinese food. Anyway, chicken chow mein, portion of chips, portion of mushrooms, and prawn crackers, of course. But serious question time. Okay, well, it's going to be food related. Is there anything that you used to buy that you always found a bit daunting to cook yourself, but when you learned how to do it, you realized, oh, that's actually not as hard as I thought. So now you usually just buy ingredients and make it yourself. For me, specifically, that chow mein I mentioned, I kind of just, during COVID times, I got used to making my own Chinese food. And one of my favorite things was chow mein. And it took me 3 attempts to get the balance of the soy sauce right. But it's so easy, I probably wouldn't order one again because I can make it exactly as I like it. Also, I have not really ordered a curry from a Chinese place since I started making my own and using the Chinese type curry sauce, which is it's one of my favorite types of curries. And I'm making my mouth is watering just talking about it. So let me know what you think below. Things that you learned how to make yourself when you realized it was a bit more practical, well, not necessarily easy, but it wasn't as daunting as you initially thought. Let me know what you think in a comment below. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.